G'day all, today I have an interview for you with Emily Sheehan of Woolly Bear Knits. Now she is a knitter, knitting pattern designer amongst other things, and we have a great chat about everything to do with running your own handmade business, whether it's a product-based business, also obviously a digital business. So we talk about both of those things today. Now you'll notice in the video my hair is a bit different. It's because we recorded this interview last year, but it is time now to bring you this interview with Emily. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get a lot out of it, and let's get started. I'm here today with Emily Sheehan. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited today to chat to you about your business journey. I believe you started in 2019. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. And that was motivated by a move from one place to the other. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I run a knitwear company called Woolly Bear Knits. It's named after the woolly bear caterpillar. I'm not sure if you have them in Australia, but they're little fuzzy caterpillars that turn into moths, but they come out in the fall a lot, and I've always liked finding them in the fall. And I grew up in Minnesota in the USA, where it's pretty cold, about 5 to 6 months out of the year. And my husband and I moved away in 2010. We moved to Colorado and then California, both within the US. And we lived away for about 6 years. And we moved back to Minnesota in 2016. And we had a young son at the time, a baby. And I decided to stay home with him just to be around a little bit more for him. And I started to get a little bored. So I rediscovered knitting in my downtime when he was napping and things like that. And one thing I really loved about living in California and also Colorado is that it's really nice all year round. You can spend lots of time outside. And in Minnesota, lots of us just hunker down and kind of hibernate all winter. And I wanted to, for my own well-being and health, to be outside more. And I discovered that the merino wool that I use is a really warm and comfortable fiber for keeping you warm while you're outside. So that kind of spurred me to start knitting hats for other people too, because, I found that this lovely natural fiber really keeps me warm, and it allowed me to spend more time outside all year round. It's a lot easier to be outside in the cold when you have the right gear.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, not something I know a lot about living where I do, but I know over in New Zealand, merino wool is a big thing.
Mhm.
For those in the South Island who get very cold in winter. So I love that you kind of, you have this progression. It's such a familiar story, wanting a little something to do with yourself, especially when you're home with a young baby and things like that. And so how did it kind of translate from, okay, I'm making some stuff for myself and friends into, oh, maybe I'll start selling some things.
Yeah, so I kind of started by selling hats as a fundraiser for my sister. She had a nonprofit business at the time, so I basically gave all the revenue to her business. And she actually encouraged me to start an Etsy shop. She was formerly a very successful Etsy shop owner. She made hand sewn aprons, and they got really popular and got on Etsy picks and things like that. And she's like, you should just get started. It's super easy to set up. So it was really her that encouraged me to start selling beyond my friends and family.
And have you got any previous business experience? Is that something that was completely new to you or something that you sort of had a bit of an idea about?
Yeah, so I do have business background. My bachelor's degree is actually in business, and I have a master's degree with a emphasis in human resources. So I do have a business background, and I've always been kind of interested in that, and I think that's helped me a lot.
Mm.
Although my school experience is very dated, marketing these days is not what I learned in undergrad. Just with the invention of social media and things like that
Mm.
that weren't even around when I was in school. So I was able to take that sort of that experience, but also I enjoyed reading business books and things like that beforehand. So I was able to combine those things into helping run a business on my own.
So what was the progression of getting started? So you opened an Etsy shop, I'm assuming, and then you were just knitting hats. What's been the progression of your business since then?
Sure. So yes, I started on Etsy and I also sell at markets and wholesale. So we were talking, I did take your wholesale course. And that was helpful in I just sort of went and ran with that without kind of knowing what I was doing. Luckily, I kind of did what I was supposed to be doing. But I started my business in 2019. So I only really had one full year under like a season, I kind of call it, because I pretty much make all my money from October to December,
Hmm.
because that's when it's cold and that's when people are buying gifts,
Hmm.
things like that. So I really only had one season under my belt before COVID pandemic hit. So, I had one season of selling at markets before everything changed and there weren't any markets for a year or two.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say during the pandemic, I think this is true of a lot of craft businesses that things kind of exploded. People were home. I haven't really mentioned yet that I also sell knitting patterns. So not only do I sell finished knitwear, which is ultimately my first priority and the thing I like the most, I also sell knitting patterns. Where I'm giving people a digital download. I sell those on Etsy and then a website called Ravelry. Um, where they can download the pattern themselves and make something themselves.
Hmm.
So I think that business really exploded during the pandemic when we were all stuck at home. People, wanted hobbies or other things to do. And I think my business, as well as a lot of others, saw a lot of growth during that time.
Hmm.
We're kind of stuck at home, we're shopping online, we're wanting to try a new hobby or rediscovering an old hobby. So the progression of my business, I've pretty much always stuck to knit hats. I've tried to increment or incorporate some macrame and things like that, and it just never did well. I don't know if it is because I didn't market it well, or I was trying to do those things in my slow season, which is right
Hmm.
now, and I don't feel like a lot of people are buying things in the summer. It's summer for us, or almost summer for us here in the Northern Hemisphere. We're out playing outside. Kids are really busy with school right now, wrapping up the school year, things like that. People just aren't shopping online as much. So I have really learned to use this slow season as my prep time for the busy season and just not worried. Like I know now that in my sixth season that summer is going to be slow and that's okay. I'm going to use that time to kind of hunker down, build stock, do admin things on my website or my Etsy shop, and use that slow time for those things instead of trying to worry about making money
Hmm.
during my slow season. So,
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. And obviously it depends on the sort of business you have and who your target
yeah.
market is and the sort of products you're selling. But having that awareness over time and over the years that you will have busier, most people will have like a busier period and a
Yeah.
slow period. And you'll sort of get to know the ebbs and flows of that for your own business and your location. Of course, down here, it's autumn. We're going into, I can see, I'm wearing my jumper, going
Yep.
into winter time. So, for those who sell what you sell down here, obviously this is their busy season. So just
Mhm.
getting a feel for that. I think sometimes new businesses kind of panic a little bit when they have a slower season. And it's helpful to hear from more established business owners that, hey, this sort of thing happens, especially in over that summer period. See, for us, it's a little bit weird for us in the Southern Hemisphere. It's very different because our summer is also Christmas.
Yep.
And it's the main school holidays, like 6 weeks, big school holidays, Christmas holidays, it's all at the same time. So, that is often a very busy season for makers in the Southern Hemisphere because you're selling for Christmas and so on and so forth. So, whereas then, we have the opposite of like our winter time can be a slow time for a
Mhm.
lot of us. People aren't, getting out as much. But sometimes some businesses that's a busy time. So, it really comes down to the business and knowing the ebbs and flows. So it's also, I think, I don't know if you found this, but I'm certainly seeing a lot of businesses struggling at the moment with the cost of living pressures and things like that are happening. So, this is a challenging time for a lot of businesses at the moment. So for those who are starting, they might be finding it really difficult to get a business off the ground. And for those of us who've been in business for a long time, we're seeing a slowdown in our sales and things like that. So
Yep.
I think it's important also to be aware of those larger pressures. It's kind of been a roller coaster, hasn't it? The last few years, we've been through COVID, where everything kind of was crazy, and then now we're getting through kind of into this sort of recession period where people don't have as much spare money. So yeah, it's a challenging time for most business owners.
Yeah, I think you sent out an email about that recently, or maybe it was on one of your recent podcasts, but I that totally resonated with me. I think a lot of people who were maybe watching other makers, maybe who started businesses around my time, 2 years later, they're like, I'm ready to do that too. They kind of got started during like a time that was really busy for all of us. And
Mm,
to know that I don't think that that is normal,
mm,
that was a blip.
yeah.
Um, and then feeling like, why can't I be successful? I've seen all these other people do it, but we just kind of, some of us got really lucky in terms of the
Mm,
timing. Like I had, 2 years of experience by then and was able to scale my business a little bit more during that busy time. But if I were just getting started during that time, I think it would have been a different story. So
mhm,
I definitely agree that, things are expensive right now. People are, it's harder to pay for gas and groceries and, everything is just, I was even talking to my husband today about vet bills, like
mm,
everything is more expensive right now. People don't have as much money I'm seeing as,
mm.
spending on fun things like knit hats. And I think that it really impacted markets last year too. I felt like markets were certainly lower than what I had expected, what I
Mhm,
ended up selling. And just being honest,
mm,
it's easy to see, what people want to put out on Instagram or
mm.
however they market themselves is everything's great, but sometimes we're struggling behind the scenes, and that's not a pretty part of the business that we show. So
No, but I think, I think it's important for makers to hear that, or beginners, or even experienced makers, who I think a big challenge of our business model is that we are very isolated, generally speaking, unless we are in some sort
Mhm.
of network of some type. A lot of craft business owners are sort of one woman or one man shows, and we might not, hear the gossip, so to speak,
Mhm.
of what's actually going on behind the scenes of other people's businesses. And I think it's helpful to kind of hear that, you're not alone. If that is something you're struggling with right now, if sales are down and you're not seeing, business is down a bit on what it was, especially down on what it was in COVID. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
that was something I don't think we're ever going to see again. Um,
yeah,
and for someone like me who's been in, I started my business in 2008. So that was during the global financial crisis, not the greatest of
yeah,
times to be
yeah,
starting a business either. And I've certainly seen the ebbs and flows since then. But the positive of that is that this will pass just like everything else passes, and things will change and business will pick up and things like that. So, if you really do want to do it, then, being in it for the long haul or taking a break and coming back to it later might be something for some people that would work for them, to
yeah. And I think
ride
maybe
it out.
right now is, you're not taking the leap of quitting your full-time job and going all in on this thing that's not tested. Maybe you continue to work part-time or find another income stream while you test this out, just because the market is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I did like to go back to another thing you said too about having kind of that network of makers. Something that I've found super helpful is just to have that community of people. And I've actually found it to be really helpful if they are not doing the same thing as you. You don't
Mm.
have that sense of like competition, even though you don't want to be competing with someone, but to have,
Mm.
like, I have one of my best maker friends. She makes stickers and what else? She does like stationery, and she's local. So, we meet up and talk like, oh, have you tried this or have you tried that? And I have a couple other maker friends that I've met through markets that we've stayed in touch via Instagram and do something totally different than me. But it's nice to like share, oh, you should do this market because that was really good. Or I think you would fit well in this. Or have you thought about selling at this store? I
Mhm.
think trying to find your sort of your group of maker friends who maybe do something different than you that you can bounce ideas off of. That's been infinitely helpful to me as a maker in my maker career so far.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with that. And ideally, Ideally, you will find that in person. I think it's really nice to be able to, sit down with, have a coffee with someone.
Hmm.
Uh, Otherwise, some sort of, you know, maybe a craft guild or some sort of craft organization or maker organization in your local area. There's usually something around that you can kind of be part of and join. Obviously, I have my online Thriver Circle, which is, was kind of the impetus behind creating that, was to create a community. Because what you don't
Yeah.
really want to do is like hang out in free Facebook groups. That's probably not where you're going to find the best support.
Yes.
Ideally, you
Yes.
want something a little bit more private and personal than that, I think, generally speaking. I mean, that's a great place to go for like random questions or whatever, but you're going to get an interesting mix of responses and they won't all necessarily be particularly supportive. So being aware of that.
Agreed. I have managed to stay away from the Facebook group so far, but I think it's some people, they're like, "Well, I'm shy. I have a hard time meeting friends." And I'm an introvert too. But I think I've found a lot of friends that became real life friends via Instagram just by, liking their posts and
Mm,
giving them compliments, genuine compliments, and just reaching out via DM if you connect about something. You do have to be brave enough to take the first step, but I feel like it's always worth it. And even if you are an introvert, trying to find those one-on-one friends is it's you don't have to need a huge group of people, but
mm.
to have a couple maker friends that you can bounce ideas off of. It's just being brave enough to take the first step and invite them out to coffee or
Yeah,
whatever works for you.
absolutely. Now, to kind of pull ourselves back into talking about your business journey, let's talk about marketing for a minute because you did touch on it. Like when you're at uni, marketing was very different to how it is now. So, what was your sort of strategy that you developed over time? Because you said you did some markets, you do markets, you do some wholesale, but then of course you sell online and Etsy. What's the sort of main ways that customers are finding you these days?
Yeah, I think customers mostly find me through Instagram, and I hate to have kind of all of my eggs in one basket, as the saying goes. But it has been probably my number one source of growth for me. I do post on TikTok. I've kind of stuck to TikTok being more about knitting, so kind of knitting pattern focused more. That's done better for me. Whereas Instagram, I try to balance trying to sell my knit hats, but also having knitting tips and tricks for the people who are knitting my patterns. It's always been a hard balance. I post a picture about a hat for sale. People are like, "What's the pattern? And what's that yarn?" and things like that. So I try to, it's a really hard balance to mix both of them. And I've also tried really hard to grow my email list. I think I have a couple thousand people on my email list now. And I've done that. And a lot of them are also makers, and I have them segmented. So I know if they come through certain avenues that I tag them as a maker, and I'm sending them slightly different emails than people who have bought things off of my Shopify website.
Mhm.
But I do definitely recommend having an email list. I know everyone will tell you that, but there's just so much noise out on the internet right now to be able to be into somebody's inbox with. I try to keep it to they're not long emails. It's, I'm having a sale, or here's a new knitting pattern, or here's a new color of hat that I've released. It's kind of just like a need to know, but they get first dibs on everything.
Mhm.
I did create, I get a lot of questions on Instagram of, where do you get your knitting tools, and where do you buy yarn and things like that. So I made a free digital download that people can enter their email address, and they get a copy of that, and it has links to everything that I use. Some of it I did do affiliate links through Amazon, so I'm getting a little bit of a commission, which helps. But I've got their email address now, and I know that if they're asking about my tools, they're probably interested in knitting patterns. So I target them with any emails that are focused about knitting patterns. So that's been really helpful. I think that's probably that freebie has been the number one driver of people to my email list. So definitely recommend if people can add any value to their followers that way. That's a good way to get their email address.
Yeah, that sounds great. Sounds like you've really got a good structure there with your email marketing and your targeting and things like that. A lot of people listening might be like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you can tag different subscribers so that you can send them different types of email depending on what they're interested in. And of course, when you are like Emily and you have perhaps a business that does two different things, and let's linger on that for a little bit because this comes up a
Mhm.
lot. This idea of I sell patterns, but I also sell the final product. How do I do that? Like I had literally like 2 days ago in the Thrive Circle, someone asked this question. They're like, I've been selling patterns successfully in my Etsy shop for a few years. I used to sell bags as well, but now I kind of want to sell bags again. Should I put them in the same shop? Should I start a new shop? I don't really want to start a new shop. Like, how do you balance that selling patterns with selling the final product in the same place? Or do you do it in the same place? Do you have like a Shopify shop for your bags and Etsy for your bag? Like, how do you balance that yourself?
Yeah.
What's worked for you?
Yeah, so I kind of I've thought about that also. And I think about people that I follow. I can't remember if I found this person through you or someone else. I don't remember what her name is, but her shop is like Matroshka Doll
Oh,
Shop.
yes.
I think she does embroidery, which I think is
Yes.
amazing. I purchased, so she has kits and I think once in a while will sell her finished items. So
Mhm.
like I think about her and I think about me as a follower of her. Like I like watching her do stuff and her embroidery. I would probably buy a kit from her, but I'm not going to like buy just a pattern and go out and try to find all the materials that she makes. So I try to think of like I might be a customer like some of my customers are of me. Like they want to see the product being made on
Mhm.
Instagram, maybe, but they're not going to go out and make it. Like they probably could, but they're not going to.
Mhm.
But some people do want to go out and make it themselves. So I do have everything. I have an Etsy shop where I have knitting patterns, and I also have hats and cowls for sale. And occasionally I will sell yarn. It's just kind of based on I've got extra from my wholesale orders to get rid of it type thing. And people do ask for it. So
Mhm.
I plan to sell more yarn again in the fall, but I kind of like to keep it as a special thing so that people have some reason to buy it at the
Yeah.
moment and not just wait.
Yeah.
Um, so I have an Etsy shop, and then in my Etsy shop specifically, I have a section. I think they're called sections in Etsy
Yeah.
that says knitting patterns. So going to my Etsy shop right now just to confirm. Yeah, it says knitting patterns. So if people know kind of what they're doing on Etsy, they would be able to filter just for knitting patterns. And then I have a section that says merino wool hats and merino wool cowls, so that hopefully it's organized. And then I have my website the same way. On my website, I just actually added the knitting patterns to my website because so I launched my website last summer.
Mhm.
That was a huge project, and I'm really proud that I did it all myself with a little
Looks
bit of tech
amazing.
help from my husband. Thanks. Um, I could tell when I was looking at my Shopify analytics, so I use Shopify, that people were searching for knitting patterns. So I could
Mhm.
see what people were looking for. And I did not have my patterns on my website yet because I was kind of thinking, well, I'll try to steer my finished knitwear customers to my website so that I'm not directing traffic to Etsy that gets directed
Mhm.
off of my shop somewhere
Yeah.
else, which I learned from you and others. um, so I did recently add knitting patterns as digital downloads. I had kind of heard mixed things about Shopify's digital download apps not being great, but I haven't had any problems so far. So my knitting patterns are live on my website too. And there's just in my collection section, I've got one for knitting patterns where they can download that directly from my website too. So I
Awesome.
haven't separated everything because I feel like that would be too confusing for my
Mhm.
customers. I think
Mhm.
if I were doing something completely different than knitting, then maybe I would separate it if I decided to start selling woodworking or something like that,
Mhm.
which I'm not going to. But if
Never
it
say
was
never.
totally different, I think that would be confusing for customers. So
Mhm.
I think in my situation, it makes sense to have it all in one spot.
And how do you make it really obvious on the shop front, which is a pattern and which is a finished product?
Yeah. So I think I've only had one time in 6 years where someone has said, "Are you going to ship that thing that I ordered from you?" It was like a six US dollar pattern. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, my hats cost a little bit more than that. So I clarified that, hey, this is a digital download. So on Etsy, on my thumbnail image, I put a little blurb that says
Mhm.
knitting pattern right on the first image.
Mhm.
The first two words in my product listing say knitting pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I tried to make it obvious. And then if you click on the pattern, like the listing description on Etsy, you have to look, I don't even remember what it says now, read item description or something. It's kind of buried,
Oh,
but if they
so
do click
terrible.
that, it says, that it's I'm just looking at an example quick. It says uh digital, well, Etsy puts the digital download badge on there, but it says, please note this is a listing for a knitting pattern only, not a finished product. You'll receive digital downloadable file of instructions to knit this hat. If you want to purchase one, then check out my shop listings for a finished product. So I think it's working for me because I've only had one person in 6 years be confused about it. But yeah, I would just make it as obvious as possible that this is a kit or, a pattern for something, whether it's fiber arts or something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've done all the right things there, having that little thing on the main image and stuff like that really helps. So yeah, I think it can work really well because sometimes you might get a crossover, you never know. Some I
Yep.
know you generally probably have separate customers, the knitting pattern customers and the finished product customers. But occasionally, someone might find you via the other thing, or they might want to buy a gift for someone and they don't have time to
Yep.
do it themselves, things like that. So
I've
yeah.
definitely had that specific situation. I had someone buy like 2 knitting patterns and 2 finished things. And I actually messaged them the first time it happened. Like, did you mean to buy the pattern and, this is a finished item? She's like, oh, yeah, yeah. I just liked the colors that you picked and I won't have time to make it for my friend or something like that. So I do over time have, I would say at least a handful, it happens a couple times a year where I get people buying knitting patterns and finished items for the exact reason that you mentioned.
Now, just a quick question on the whole patterns thing, because I don't think I've covered this in a previous episode, and it's something some people might be interested in. How do you actually go about like creating a knitting pattern? I think it's kind of descriptive, like knit this many, purl this many, blah, 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 things like that. So, but how did you actually go about creating the pattern itself, like the downloadable pattern? What was the process there?
Yeah, so I would definitely make sure that if you're writing a pattern, whether it's embroidery or crochet or any other kind of digital instructions for something, like take a look at other ones that you have to make sure there's kind of a standard format that you follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually created on my Etsy shop, I do have 3 pattern templates that you can buy. They're digital downloads, and it links to a document in Canva, which I use to design the way the knitting patterns look. It's actually a template that you can use and customize. So I do have 3 of those on my website if you just want it to be easy. But because it'll say, the materials that you need, instructions. It's generally for it will work well for knitting and crochet patterns, but I think people could tweak the format for something else. But I would say in general, to look at other patterns, the format of them, because there's a pretty standard way. I would take a look at I'm in America, but American Craft Council has some standard guidance for fiber art patterns. And then what I do is, when I have an idea, write it out, and then I'll usually kind of float it by a couple of my knitting friends to say, have you seen this before? Obviously, I don't want to copy someone else. But there's only so many combinations of knitting stitches that you can do, especially because I mostly work with super bulky yarn, which is the thickest weight of yarn possible. There's kind of only so much you can do with it because you kind of generally cast on the same number of stitches to make it the right size. Specifically, I'm talking about hats because that's mostly what I make. But kind of float it by a couple friends. And then what I usually do is and this is pretty standard in the knitting and crochet communities, is to have test knitters who will knit to your pattern. They'll tell you, kind of give them a deadline, and have them knit the pattern, make sure it comes out the same way you did. Do they have any questions? I also have a friend who's an English teacher and also a knitter, and she always proofreads all my patterns for me before I get them published. So she's amazing. And yeah, have it go through testing and get their feedback. And then I use their feedback to make sure that the pattern's super clear for any random person who's going to be knitting it, that they'll get the ideal results. And then I also monitor my Etsy messages. I get a lot of questions from people of, is this thing clear? Or if they have questions, I try to go back and then edit the pattern to address any questions that I'm getting a lot, which doesn't happen too often, but I think that's just generally good. If you're getting a ton of questions about the same thing, as to how can I make this more clear for other people? Number one, so I stop getting the questions, but number two, I want my stuff to be as clear as possible so that, it's clear for everyone.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, actually, for anyone. If you're getting the same question from different customers, there's something you can fix to make sure you don't keep getting that question from different customers. Thank you. That was really interesting. Is knitting like crochet, where there's like different things in different countries? Like I know there's like I think with crochet, you've got like the English style and then the American style, and the stitches are completely different depending on which one you do. It's a bit confusing.
I think, so this is probably just my US focused mind, but I kind of stick to US terms. I just actually learned that there's like different crochet terms. I actually learned that from an Instagram reel, and I was like, oh, I didn't know, because my grandma taught me how to crochet, and I only kind of know the basics. I never really learned to learn patterns. I kind of just did what she was doing, and YouTube helps for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think knitting, I think there are different ways of doing things. There's different ways to cast on, which is how you get your stitches onto your needles.
Yes.
But a quick search on YouTube would help. On Ravelry, which is a website where you can buy patterns for crochet and knitting patterns. It actually, when you're uploading the pattern to that, says what terms is this written in, US American terms, etc. So that's something it's a field on the pattern listing. If people are looking to buy it, that they can check that out. But yeah, I just actually learned about the crochet different terms. But I think it was single or double crochet means something different in English terms versus American. It's something like that. So.
Yeah, I'm such a like novice crochet. Like every time I need to do a granny square, I have to like look up a YouTube video to remind me how to do it.
Yeah.
But I don't care what it's called. The stitches are called. I'm like, okay, I do this 3 times. That's all I need to know. So that's fine. So just thinking about back through sort of the history of your business, are there any like mistakes or big mistakes or lessons learned things that you could perhaps say, okay, maybe I could have done this differently to help other people perhaps avoid similar things happening?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know that I've had any like huge missteps. But I would say something that I've definitely learned over time is to not compare yourself so much to others. Like go in with trying to be who you are. You bring something unique to your craft, and whether that's the colors you use or the style or the vibe that you want, your ideal customer may be different than other people's. Something that when I first started, I was just following basically anybody who's knitting stuff I liked. I'm talking specifically about Instagram here. And over time, I felt like I was feeling so much pressure, like, oh, I need to try that yarn. I need to buy yarn from this independent dyer, or I need to be knitting that pattern that someone else is knitting because it looks cool. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I only have so much time and I need to focus on what I do best. And I've tried over the years to make sure that my hats fit really well. It's a pattern that holds up well, that looks good, both in a flat lake, because my stuff is photographed, because I sell mostly online, but also needs to look good on an actual person. So I'm like, I need to just focus on these 3 things that I do really well. And I actually ended up unfollowing a bunch of other people in my community, which felt sad at the time because I want to have relationships with those people. But I suppose I could have muted them also, that maybe would do the same thing without actually like unfriending them. And tried to gather inspiration from other people outside of my niche. Never say that word. Gather inspiration from people outside of my niche. Whether that's just kind of their photography style or the way they market things. And I don't know. I feel like that really helped me grow my business and be more unique in a way that was authentic to me. So I think it's just avoiding the pressure of feeling like you need to be doing what everybody else in your area is doing. And sometimes that's, putting your blinders on and not looking at what they're doing. And, sometimes stuff shows up in your explore feed on Instagram. I'm very Instagram focused. As you can tell, it's kind of really where I built my business. That's kind of what I'm thinking, but I think the same goes for TikTok or Pinterest, wherever you're kind of getting your inspiration from, and marketing your stuff. But I would say, yeah, you just figure out makes you you and go with that, and be less focused on getting inspiration from people who are doing the same thing as you. I would say that was something I kind of fell into that took up a lot of time, and even just mental effort that I didn't need. Now I'm able to just much better focus on, this is what I'm doing, this is what I do well, this is who I am, and this is my ideal customer. I've definitely learned that over the last 6 years.
That is so important. And I think it's a lesson a lot of us learn the hard way. And, I follow some jewelers, but I try not to follow too many people who make stuff, especially similar to mine, because then you accidentally see something and like, oh no, I feel like I had an idea that looked like that. Now I can't make it because that person's made it,
No.
Stuff like that, or feeling like, yeah, that comparison trap. And I often do say to people, just unfollow. If you're falling into that and it's causing you problems, just stop looking at other people's stuff who are doing similar to you and just focus on your own business now first. So yeah, 100% agree with that, that it's an important lesson to learn through the time. And we take inspiration from other people, and we do want to connect with other people who are making similar stuff to us as well, because we can kind of talk shop as it was. But yeah, sometimes it's important to just have a break from that, for sure.
Yep. And I think it's nice. I have like a little group of, we call each other maker besties. They do knit things, and we, are very open with each other about, what we're doing and things that we have planned. And it is nice to have those just few handful of people that you can talk shop with. But most of all, I focus my maker friendships on people who are outside of knitwear.
Yeah. So let's take a step back for a second, just talk about life in general. What is your sort of work-life balance, or lack of balance look like?
I always say that I work a full-time job for part-time pay. It's the maker life has allowed me to have a lot of flexibility when my son is young. He's 8 now, so it's gotten a lot easier to work while he's at school during the day. I sort of try to keep those set hours. He does start really early at 7 a.m., so my day starts early. Luckily, I'm a morning person, so I kind of start my day with, if it's nice out, I'm like to go for a walk in the morning, and I do yoga. And then kind of knit in between all of that when I can. I've gotten better at squeezing in knitting. But over the years, I have been able to set better boundaries of, I was taking my knitting everywhere in the beginning. I don't do that anymore. I try to keep it to work hours. And during the busy season, obviously, I'm usually working while I'm watching TV or something at night. But when it's not busy, I'd rather be reading a book or something like that, not watching TV. So my work balance has gotten easier. In the beginning, I was, squeezing things into nap time or time that I had to myself. But now I have a lot of time to myself. So I use that for working. And it's been nice that I've, I think you probably resonate with this too, and like being able to take time for yourself and those things that fill up your cup. And like for me, it's walking and yoga. I always try to make time for those. It gets harder during the busy season where I'm like, oh, I don't really have time to go for a walk today. But I always know that I'll feel better if I do get outside for a little bit. And so, but things are going to change for me actually next week. I just accepted a part-time job. So I am going, kind of been ready to enter the workforce a little bit. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I'm going back into my field of human resources. And so things are going to look a little different for Woolly Bear Knits this year. I probably just won't do as many markets. And I actually just hired a team of people to help me with some knitting. So that's been really exciting, and they're starting soon. So that'll be a whole nother thing to manage, of having some people on my team to help me. So really excited about that.
Yeah, the new chapter a new chapter
Yeah.
unfolding
Yep.
in the future of your business. Speaking of knitting, a question that popped into my mind because I like to chat to the makers about this. How did your relationship with knitting change when you went from doing it as a hobby to doing it for
Yeah.
work?
That's a great, yeah, I definitely don't knit for fun anymore. I try usually in January. I'll have time, January and February, kind of have time and motivation to knit a sweater or two. The sweater I have sitting next to me right now is not going to get finished before the busy season starts. I have my son is always asking me, "Can you knit me this hat?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can," knowing in my mind it's going to take me like 2 hours to do, but it just tends to fall off the priorities. It definitely it's not so much a hobby for me anymore. It's definitely like, this is my business. This is what I do to make money. And I don't really find it to be, oh, this sounds sad to say, but like, I don't find it to be like the thing I would choose to do in my spare time. I would rather be out on a walk or doing yoga or having wine with friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally understand. I'm 100% the same. I don't, jewelry making is definitely a job. It's work. I still enjoy it, but I don't
Yeah.
choose to do it out in my off time. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
when I started, it was something I did in my spare time after work or before work or whatever. But now it is work, so it's
Yep.
definitely changes your relationship to your craft. And I know for some people that is a deal breaker. That's when they decide, well, no, I don't want it to become work. I want it to stay a craft, and that's totally valid and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
a good thing to know, as soon as possible, so that if it
Yeah.
is something you want to just keep as a hobby or as something you love to do. I think, some artists struggle with this as well, visual artists and painters and things like that, where, you have to learn how to think of it as work, and it can be a really difficult thing to do. So, yeah.
Yep. And I think kind of going back to what we were saying about starting a business during the pandemic
Mm.
and just things taking off, I would say you don't have to monetize all your hobbies. It's hard. My husband kind of likes that too. He was really into biking and he started a bike shop. So we're kind of like, you know, maybe not practicing what we preach there, but
You don't have to
it's
monetize all
it's
your hobbies. You can monetize one
yeah,
or two.
yeah, exactly. And it's okay not to. And like,
Mm.
I would really say like test out the market. Like, do you think people will actually buy what you're making? With
Mhm.
hats, I can make one in an hour. It's, a lot, but people are like, why don't you sell your sweaters? And I'm like, I'd have to charge $400 for a
Mhm.
sweater or a jumper, um, to make it worth my time, and I don't know who's going to pay for that. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there, but that would be work to find who's that customer, how do I market to them, taking all the photos for that. That's a ton of work that I'm like, I'll just keep that for fun.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. And like I have hobbies, I've monetized a few different things over the years. And, my main hobby my whole life has been reading. And, I've always thought, oh,
Yeah.
maybe I should be a writer. Maybe I should be an editor. Maybe, and I'm like, you know what? No, it's something that's so special to me. And it's such a thing that I use to relax, that I do not want to monetize it, because I don't want to take that and turn it into something different. So
Yeah.
whatever that is for you, those of you listening,
Yeah.
watching to this, maybe you feel that way about your craft and you want to just preserve it and keep it something that's special, that's just for you, that nobody else has to have any input into. And you're not doing it because as soon as you start selling it, you're making for other people and you're not just making for yourself. And it completely changes
Mhm.
how you relate to your work.
It really does. And I should acknowledge too, like, that's
Mm.
probably a really privileged thing for me to say, is to like, oh, you don't have to monetize everything. Sometimes, depending on where you are in your life, maybe you
Mm.
do need to, and that's okay too. So
Mm.
I should call that out too, that
Mm.
like I can say that from a place of privilege, that I
Mm.
don't need to monetize everything, and that's okay. But if you do, that's also okay too. It's
Yeah.
just acknowledge that it's going to be hard work to get it up and running, and that's okay too. It's
Mm.
good to work hard sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's worth it.
Yeah.
I certainly don't regret doing what I did and, starting and it's, the beginning is hard. The beginning is the hardest time. And it's
Mhm.
because you're still learning so much and you're developing and growing and, you're so unsure and uncertain as to whether anything's going to pan out for you. So knowing that that is the hardest time, I think is helpful as well. It gets easier. It doesn't mean you have to work less necessarily. I mean, you might be able to work less and that's great, but it won't be such a mental load because you're not learning everything for the first time.
Yep. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier too, of I've got certain things I do at certain times of year. I actually have it written out here in my notes, but like this time of year I'm doing I'm knitting really hard, and these couple months I kind of try to take it easy. And these months I'm knitting my wholesale orders, and
Mm-hmm.
these months I'm focusing on selling. And this is the month where I always do professional photos for my website. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I've got it over 6 years of like pretty down, like what month I do certain big projects in. And, that took me 2 years to figure out, and
Mm-hmm.
being okay with a couple of those months are very slow in terms of sales. And that's
Yeah.
okay. I'm going to do these things during those months
Mm-hmm.
to be prepared for when it is busy.
Yeah, speaking of your photos are beautiful. How do you do that? Do you have a professional photographer or do you hire models? Like, what's your process there?
Yeah, thanks. I definitely would recommend. I feel like that's like one of my top recommendations for
Mhm.
people who are selling online is I know you say this to us too. You need to have good photos that
Mm.
show, your item, kind of in a simple flat lay, have it a lifestyle photo where people are using your photo, like you modeling jewelry on people, I'm modeling
Mhm.
hats on people. Um, I have a person who does my photos. She's done them the last 3 years, I think. And then I used a different photographer before that. So she's doing most of the lifestyle photos of hats being worn. I have asked my friends to model in the past for me. So you'll see kind of the same people year after year. One of my best friends has been my model the whole time. So that's kind of fun. She kind of knows what to do now and how to pose and things like that. So, and she brings her daughter. So it's fun to
Oh,
see
that's
her
nice.
daughter grow up in the pictures too for the kids' hats. But I think, yeah, it was certainly something I don't feel bad about investing in every year because I know makes my life so much easier that they're on my website. I can use them for Instagram. I can, you somebody asks for a headshot, you've got one ready to go. Or if you're applying for a craft market, they ask for examples of your work often. You can just
Mm.
send them a couple nice looking photos. I would definitely recommend. I do some of my flat lay photos just on a white background. I take those just because in case I add new colors after
Mhm.
having my professional photos that I need to be able to do them myself too. But the professional ones always turn out way better.
They have those fancy cameras. Does make a difference.
Yeah.
And the skill, of
I have one
course.
of those
Can't
too.
you?
I just don't know how to use it very well.
Yeah, the skill is very important too.
Yeah.
Um, so what would you say has been like one of the biggest highlights in your business journey? One of the things that's been most exciting?
Yeah. I would say, I think from a personal standpoint, it's like make all the connections that I've made.
Mm.
So the friends I've made through Instagram or Minnesota maker friends that there's a big Minnesota maker community, the friends that I've been able to make through that and just kind of sharing opportunities, bringing people up with you of, giving them. So I had a couple of friends who gave me advice early on, and I try to
Mm.
pass on that favor of helping others get up and running. So I think that's been one of the most rewarding things. Um, Kind of externally, my work has been, I was on a local news TV show twice that my hats were featured. That was kind of a huge highlight. Hopefully it happens again this year. It's been a couple years now. So
That's cool.
um, and then last year, a couple of my products were picked as like Etsy's pick. They got the
Mm.
Etsy's pick badge. And I've noticed that kind of going back to the professional photos, it was all ones that were like being modeled by people.
Mm.
So I would say, make sure you get those lifestyle photos. I think Etsy's looking for that. And I did see a boost in sales on the products that were Etsy's pick. So that was an accomplishment for me, having those little badges on there.
Yeah. No, I think modeled photos, I think, are super important if you are selling something that somebody wears. Like having good model shots really does make a difference.
Yeah.
And it can be challenging. Like I generally model stuff myself, and it can be challenging to get a
Mhm.
good photo of yourself.
Yeah.
But if you can, work with other people and have a model, then that's an awesome idea, and it's great to hear that it's working well for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Or even if you have a friend too, right, who's like maybe a
mhm.
budding photographer, they want to get into it, like just
Yeah,
having
yeah.
someone else, take the photos and then have a different friend model them so you can kind of tell them what to do. It's always kind of awkward to do that yourself in the beginning, unless you've got a good photographer who's like,
Learn how
stand
to
this way and
pose.
look that way. Yeah. But I think even like having someone who has, if you don't have the photography skills, finding somebody else who can help you out, and maybe you just pay them and a couple, items. That's what I do with my friends, and give them a coffee shop gift card and a new hat every year. And they're usually happy to help. So
That's really awesome. Really nice of them to do that. So what would you say would be the biggest piece of advice? I mean, you've given a lot of really good advice already in this podcast, but what would be something that you would like to pass on to anyone listening to this?
yeah, I think I've said it before too, but I think it's just knowing um what your ideal who your ideal customer is and marketing toward them. So for me, it's, I want to encourage people to spend more time outside all year round, whatever that looks like for them. They might not be, crazy downhill skiers or doing something really intense, but just getting outside. Maybe you're walking with your coffee in the morning like I do, or you're walking your dog and you want to be cute and warm, or you're just running errands. Or you put your hat on after you're done skiing and you want, gotta cover up your skiing hair. Just whatever that I just want like outside to feel accessible to everyone in whatever way feels authentic for them. So that's who my customer is. And I know it's kind of a wide range, but I think it's just knowing who that is for you and targeting your stuff, whether it's your marketing, your Instagram posts or your TikTok, whatever it is. And just trying to figure out what makes you unique, and not trying to be like everybody else. And I think that comes over time. In the beginning, sorry, dog shaking might not be super clear in the beginning. But over time, I think just continuing to hone in on what that is for you.
Yeah.
And not get caught up in that comparison.
Yes. Yeah. And looking at your website and social media, it's very clear. And I think you've done a really good job of that. Your photos are branded and on point. Your website is, perfectly reflective of that. Your story comes through clearly, and you're telling that story through your photographs as well as through what you're writing. And it does create a certain mood, and that mood is your brand. And that's the feeling that people will connect with or not. Maybe like when I read your stuff, being in a country where it literally doesn't get below zero where I live. We don't get frost here,
Yeah.
But even I was like, oh, it's like that's I can so relate to that. Like this, like get outside, enjoy the weather all year round. For us, it's more like summer. You've got to wear hats and sunscreen so you don't get fried. But it's still appealed to me because I could understand that emotion. And yeah, so I think that sort of thing is really effective. And I think branding like that is so important, and people get stuck on brand, especially at the beginning. People get stuck on, oh, my logo, my, whatever. That's not what it is. Branding is really having a story, a really good story, and knowing who you're telling that story to and who's going to resonate with that. And that runs through everything that you choose to put out there. And, your business is a great example of a business that's doing that really well.
Thanks. And I think too, like you said, you might not be for everyone, but you might have a friend. Like I don't need a wedding ring because I have one already, but like I know my friend is a minimalist. She might love your wedding rings, and I can tell you about, tell her about you. I think it's just, knowing that you're not for everyone, and that's okay. But the power of, friends telling friends, oh, my friend Emily makes these hats that you should check out. Even if they didn't buy one, they might be telling their friends about it too. So yes, I think that power of branding is really important.
Yeah, and word of mouth. I think we all forget about word of mouth. It's not something we tend to talk about when we're talking about marketing. We talk about Instagram or TikTok or Etsy SEO or whatever. But word of mouth is so powerful. It's the most powerful type of marketing that exists, and it's not something we can control, but it's something we can contribute to, and something that we can encourage, I guess, through our branding and our marketing and our visuals and what we put out there. And the story is really the most important part, because that's the thing that sticks with people, and that's what they will then share with others.
Yep. And I read recently to this book, and it was like, it's important to have your story, but how do you connect that to other people to help them solve their problems, right? So like for me, I wanted to be warm all year round, but I'm sure that other people have that problem too. And how does my stuff help solve that problem for them? So making it more about your customer, not just about you too. People like will follow me because or anyone because they want to know more about that person who's making their stuff. But really in the end it comes down to are they going to buy it because they need it and it solves some problem for them?
Yes, 100% that. I think a lot of beginner makers get very caught up in telling their own story and forget that what they're actually supposed to be doing is telling the customer's story in a way
Mm-hmm.
that will connect that customer to you. You know, you can tell your own story, but at the end of the day, remember that it's about them and how they will see your stuff and how like you said, how your products will solve a problem in their life, and that you want them to choose you to solve that problem because of the way you put your work out there into the world.
Definitely.
Awesome. Did you by any chance bring a quote along today that you would like to share with us?
Ooh, I'm not really a quote person,
That's
but there
okay.
was this one that I saw a long time ago that stuck with me because I'm just scrolling to find it. Um, I saw this quote it was actually in a hair salon, but it's by Elsie DeWolf, and she was an interior designer. I had to look up who she was before this because I just remembered the quote. I couldn't remember who she was, but it says, I'm going to make everything around me beautiful. That will be my life. And I think that's sort of stuck with me. I think just my mom always really appreciated the beauty in little things, or sorry, she does appreciate the beauty in little things and kind of taught us to do that too, whether it's just a pretty flower or the way the waves are sparkling today, or look at the clouds. But I just like think making beautiful things is really satisfying and sharing them with others. I thought that was kind of a quote that resonated with me when I saw it a couple years ago. Yes, I just like to make things pretty, and that's something that's important to me.
Yeah, and I think it's never a bad thing to make the world a little bit more beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Emily, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you. Where should people go to find out more about your work?
Yeah. So I mostly hang out on Instagram. I'm at Woolly Bear underscore knits, and Woolly has two L's in it. I know it's spelled differently throughout the world. I'm also on TikTok at Woolly Bear Knits, and then people can find my website, woollybearknits.shop.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It was.